Year 8. I hope you've all had an absolutely wonderful half term. Welcome to term 6. Welcome to your new period of history. Now, I want you to think back to the last piece of work you did in term 5, which was the restoration of the monarchy. Going back, restoring, making things the same again. Now, I want you just to think about that as we go into this new topic, and I want you to think, what would be the opposite of that? What would be the opposite of going back to something, making sure things stayed the same, things went back to what they were? Just think on that, and next slide, we're going to do a starter activity. Okay, let's get this Industrial Revolution started. In your exercise books, or if you're working on paper, on your paper, can you write down two headings for me? Picture A and picture B. Now, you're going to do a bit of a challenge task for me, and all I'm going to get you to do is look at two pictures. You can look at them on the slide, on the PowerPoint, they are slide 3, or it is the PDF entitled Starter. And I want you to time yourself. And I want you to give yourself 3 minutes. Put 3 minutes on your mobile phone, on your timer, or set an alarm for 3 minutes. Set it. Put your phone face down. And then I want you to look at these pictures, and I want you to write down as many things as you can are different between picture A and picture B, please. Now, hopefully, you remember on the first slide, I said that I wanted you to think about what was the complete opposite of staying the same, of going back to something. Well, hopefully, you came up with the idea of change, because that's what the Industrial Revolution was. Revolution means complete change. And if we think about industrial, or the word industry, it's about work. So the Industrial Revolution is a huge change, a complete change in the way that people in Britain worked and the knock-on effect of that. And we think about the Industrial Revolution as the period from 1750 to 1900, and we can see there that we're looking at the growth of industry, how work began to grow, and how it began to change. Because in 1750, you probably saw from that picture, Britain was a mainly agricultural society. What I mean by that is people lived and worked on farms. By 1900, in your second picture, hopefully what you could see there was that there were factories, that people would be going to work in these places. And that means that Britain begins to make its money from products which they make. They go to factories, they make things from raw materials, rather than an agricultural society, which was just the crops that you grew. What I'd like you to do is to get that heading down, what was the Industrial Revolution, and can you write down the two boxes for me? And they're key terms, okay? These are all about, Industrial Revolution is a key term, you need to understand what it is. So when you write it down, maybe do it in colour, maybe highlight it, put a box around it, make it stand out for me, please, Year 8. Let's start with task 1 then. So we're going to look at the changes in 5 areas. So we're going to look at the amount of population, we're going to look at work, we're going to look at transport, we're going to look at medicine, and we're going to look at living conditions. All right. Now you've got a sheet called task 1, and it's got lots of different bits of information on it. Now, this is completely up to you. You do not need to print this. If you haven't got a printer, do not worry about it. If you have got a printer and you want to print it, you might like to try and group the cards. There should be 3 on population, 3 on work, 3 on transport, 3 on medicine, 3 on living conditions. So maybe you want to colour code them, maybe you want to cut them up, or maybe you just want to have a look at them. You don't need to print it out unless you want to. So I'd like you now to either print or, if you prefer, draw the following table. Now, the table is task 1 optional, okay? So take that, have a look at it, and could you draw it in your exercise book or on your paper for me? Now, can you be nice and tidy with this? Can you make sure you draw the lines with a ruler and a pencil? And take up a full page for it. Don't squash this up. Take up a full page. Now, once you've written it out for me, once you've drawn this out for me, we're going to do a bit of a trust game, year 8, because I am trusting you to do this task. And what I want you to do is to get the task sheet 1, and I want you to find the information on population, and I want you to write it in the correct box. Which bit of population goes in 1750? Which bit goes in 1825? Which bit goes in 1900? Think about this. Do you think population is increasing? Do you think population would be decreasing? So you're writing them in chronological order. And once you've done that, I'd like you to do the same for work, for transport, for medicine, and for living conditions. Now, I mentioned about trust. The reason I said this is I'm going to go through all of these on the following slides. So I am trusting you, Year 8, to have a go on this. Don't just go on to the following slides and copy them in. Have a go. Think about it. Any you can't do, it's absolutely fine to leave. And then we will go through them in the following 5 slides. Number 1, the first section of your table is population. So, in 1750, you should have, there were 11 million people in Britain. 1825, so 75 years later, there are 21 million people in Britain. The population has nearly doubled. It has increased by 10 million. Now, by 1900, there were 40 million people in Britain. Again, nearly a doubling of the population from 1825. Bit of numeracy for me. Can you tell me how much population has increased from 1750 to 1900? What I'd like you to do is check you've got the information in the correct box. If you have, give it a tick. Brilliant, well done. If not, just correct it for me. And the second set of changes that we're going to look at is work. So in 1750, farming is the most common job. It's what most people did. In fact, even if you had another job, you would have done some farming to grow your own food. There's no Waitrose, there's no Lidl. If you didn't grow it or kill it, you would not eat. Now, by 1825, there are still a lot of farmers. It is still a very agricultural society, but we've started to see coal mines and ironworks. And these are where we're going to get the raw materials for factories to make things. So people were working in the coal mines and the ironworks, but also starting to work in these brand new factories making goods. And by 1900, a lot of the jobs in factories were actually done by machines. So that means people's jobs were making these machines, overseeing these machines, making sure they were still working, mending these machines, setting up these machines. Okay? So if you got them right, tick them, big ticks for us. Anything that's not quite right or that you left out, just correct or add in. With new jobs, it meant that people needed to move around a little bit more. And in 1750, people didn't travel very far because, quite frankly, the only way to go was on foot. Your feet walking if you were poor, possibly on horseback if you were a little bit richer. There were some boats as well, but most people didn't go very far. Now, by 1825, if you wanted to get around a place, it's still going to be by foot, okay? It's still going to be on horseback, still going to be by foot. It might be in a coach, but the roads have improved. So your journey would be much, much more comfortable than it would have been in 1700. By 1900, there's a huge change because people travelled by railway. It was much, much faster. It could take people, it could take goods, it could go all over the country. And if you look, in 1750, if you'd wanted to travel from London to Edinburgh in Scotland, it would have taken you 12 days to get there by road. 1825, because the roads have improved, you've knocked 10 days off your journey. They're still going to take you 2 days. That's 48 hours, year 8. 1900, you'd go by rail. You wouldn't have even bothered going by road, and it would take you 9 hours. Now, a bit of numeracy challenge for you. Get those brain cells working. What's the difference in hours? How many hours have you saved by travelling in 1900 compared to 1825? How many hours have you saved? How many hours have you saved from 1900 to 1750? In other words, I want to know how many hours are in 12 days. Because people are moving around more, because they're doing different jobs, because transport has increased. Unfortunately, we do start to see new types of illnesses and injuries. The roads are busier and trains have led to accidents like that. Working in factories, working with machinery was very different to planting potatoes. You get very different injuries from that. And also, because people were moving around more, they were talking to different people and more people, and that could lead to disease spreading faster. And so medicine needs to make progress during this period. And we see in 1750, there's lots of diseases around. Lots of them will be fatal. In other words, if you get them, you would die. If you had an operation, if you needed an operation, doctors were quite happy to cut you open. Problem was, there wasn't any anaesthetic, so you might not have liked that. You would have been fully awake. Now, by 1825, we can control smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases, because Edward Jenner in 1796 had come up with a vaccination, a way of stopping you getting smallpox. And by 1900, lots of doctors had found vaccinations for other deadly diseases. So the chances are that you could be vaccinated. It means you wouldn't come down with one of these diseases. They've also discovered anaesthetics, so that meant that you could have an operation, you could be asleep for it, which was much better for you, for pain, and much better and easier for the doctor because you wouldn't be wriggling around. And then the last changes were your living conditions, because the chances are you might have moved. In actual fact, until 1900, it probably wasn't very nice. Even at the start of the Industrial Revolution, you probably would have lived in quite a dirty place, mainly because people didn't know about hygiene. People didn't know that germs and dirt made them unwell. And because of this, lots of babies died before they even got to 1 year old. And a lot of women died having those babies. By 1825, it really hasn't improved. People still didn't know that dirt and germs caused diseases. And they didn't have clean water. They didn't have sewer systems. And these new towns that were coming up around factories meant lots of overcrowding, lots of people who were quite dirty, talking to each other, spending time with each other, and therefore spreading diseases very quickly and very easily. But by 1900, people knew that dirt made them ill, that germs made them ill. So they started looking more at hygiene. They had clean water. Sewers were improved, and these killer diseases were much, much less common because of the vaccinations that we looked at on the previous slide. Right then, scholar's task. But I would like as many of you as possible to do this task. I want you to write down a table for me, positives and negatives. And I want you to write down all of the good things that have happened because of this Industrial Revolution, because of the change in how and where people work, in the type of work that they do. But I also want you to write down what are the negatives that have come out of this. Can you see any problems that are still in society, or even new problems that have come because of this change? So year 8, final task of lesson 1 on the Industrial Revolution. I would like you to imagine that you are a time traveller and you're going to travel to 3 different periods of time. You're going to start in 1750, you're going to go to 1825, you're going to finish off in 1900. And I want you to write me a diary entry describing each of these periods. Now, if you're going to do the hot task, you're going to describe me 3 changes. So you're going to tell me one thing that happened in 1750, one thing that happened in 1825, one thing that happened in 1900. And I want 3 lines on each date. So 3 lines on 1750, 3 lines on 1825, 3 lines on 1900. If you're going to challenge yourself a little bit more, you can describe 5 of those changes for me, okay? So 5 things that happen in 1750, something that happens in 1825, and something that happens in 1900. So you've got 5 changes altogether. Again, I want at least 3 lines on each change, so that means you will be writing me a total of 15 lines. And then scholars and anybody who wants to challenge yourself, you're going to do the hotter task, okay? So you can do these 5 changes for me. You can choose 5 things that have changed between 1750 and 1900. You're going to write 3 lines on each, but then you're going to write a further 3 lines in which ways might be better and might be worse. So you're doing that extra bit, and you can use the table that you did on slide 12. So that is the end of lesson 1 on the Industrial Revolution. I hope you have enjoyed it. As soon as you've done your work, you can submit it either on Show My Homework, or you can email your teacher. Our email addresses are all on Show My Homework for you. If you've got any issues, if you've got any questions or anything like that, please get in touch with one of us via email or Show My Homework. Thank you very much, Year 8.